Beneath the endless sky, the ocean breathes. Its waves rise and fall, ancient as time itself. Legends say the sea holds secrets deeper than mountains, older than stars. Tonight, we journey where myths and tides meet, where silence speaks through water. This is not a tale of war or conquest. It is a story of whispers, of chains unseen. The ocean calls to those who listen. It speaks in ripples, in echoes, in songs carried by salt winds. In its heart dwells Poseidon, guardian of vast blue realms, master of currents and storms. But Poseidon is more than thunder and waves. He is keeper of balance, voice of the deep. For ages, he watched the ocean flow freely, bound only by the moon's pull and the sun's warmth. Yet even gods feel unrest when harmony breaks, when silence grows heavy and still. Something unseen coils through the waters, as if chains drift beneath the waves. Fishermen sense it in their nets. Creatures sense it in their breath. The ocean feels it in its core. Tonight, we follow Poseidon into mystery, where myth reveals a truth. This is the story of Poseidon and the ocean's chains. The sea was calm, yet beneath its silence, a whisper moved. It was a breath too heavy for the waves. The horizon stretched endless, a line where sky and water touched in quiet surrender. But within the deep, something stirred, subtle yet powerful, a rhythm out of tune with the ocean's heart. Fishermen at dawn cast their nets. Their boats rocked gently, but their hands trembled without reason. The nets sank as they always did, but when drawn back, they clung to threads of light, thin as mist. The light shimmered like moonlit chains, too soft to be seen, too strong to ignore. Fish darted away, breaking patterns they had followed for centuries. Schools no longer moved as one. Dolphins breached the surface, their cries sharp, carrying questions no ear could answer. The seabirds above circled wider, as though the air itself felt uneasy. The ocean floor rumbled faintly, not like an earthquake, but like a sigh rising from stone. Coral swayed without current, bending to an invisible pull. Their colors dimmed like fading embers. Whales sang in mournful tones, their voices deeper, longer, echoing sorrow across miles of sea. The water thickened, carrying weight. It pressed upon every fin, every shell, every grain of sand. And Poseidon felt it. From his palace beneath the waves, he opened his eyes. The marble halls shone with shells and pearls, treasures of ages. Yet the air was heavy. He rose, his trident shimmering with light, not to strike, but to sense. The currents told him stories. They spoke of paths blocked, of rivers slowed, of silence spreading. The ocean, his eternal companion, no longer breathed with freedom. Poseidon moved to the grand balcony, gazing into the expanse of blue stretching in every direction. He heard the sea's pulse, slow and uneven, like a heart chained by unseen hands. The god closed his eyes, listening not with ears but with spirit. He felt the sorrow of the dolphins, the unease of the fish, the fatigue of the coral. He felt the weight pressing upon them all, like chains of glass, unseen yet unbreakable. The sea, once restless with joy and fury, now whispered only restraint. Poseidon's hand tightened on the trident. Yet he did not call storms. This was not an enemy to fight. This was a wound to understand. He descended into the trenches, where the darkness wrapped the ocean like a cloak. Creatures of shadow drifted past, their movements slower, their glow dim. The deep spoke to him, soft yet trembling, as if afraid of its own voice. "Something binds us," the waters whispered. "We are not free." Poseidon's gaze sharpened. His heart, ancient and vast, ached with recognition. He knew the sea as one knows breath, and this breath was broken. He reached out, his power flowing through the tides. It traveled across ridges, through caverns, over reefs, listening, searching, learning. Everywhere it touched, the same truth returned. Chains, invisible, delicate, yet strong as destiny. The god returned to his palace, steps echoing through the marble halls. The throne, carved from coral and pearl, no longer felt like a seat of triumph. It felt like a weight, as though even he was bound. Poseidon sat not in anger, but in thought. The sea was his realm, his love, his essence. Yet it cried out beneath his rule. For a moment, he closed his eyes, letting the waves' whispers settle in his soul. He understood. This was not a storm of nature. This was a storm of silence. And silence, he knew, was the hardest chain to break. Thus began his journey, not of war, but of listening. The restless deep had spoken, and Poseidon would answer. Poseidon lingered in silence, his gaze lost in the shifting light of his undersea palace. The hall was quiet, though streams of silver fish drifted through arches carved from coral and stone. Once, this silence would have been soothing, a gentle reminder of the sea's endless calm. Now it pressed on him, heavy, unnatural, as if the ocean itself held its breath. The god walked slowly, his steps echoing softly, each sound swallowed quickly by the water. He passed statues of forgotten heroes, their faces worn smooth by time, their eyes blind to change. He passed gardens of kelp that bent too stiffly, not in rhythm with any current. The palace was alive, yet it felt weary, as though even the walls had grown tired. Poseidon paused before a great mural, shells arranged in patterns telling the story of creation. It showed the sea's birth, waves rising from chaos, life blooming in colors never seen again. The god traced the shapes with his hand, feeling the memory etched into every line. He remembered when the ocean was untamed, a child of wild storms and playful calm. Back then, every current was free, rushing where it wished, without chains, without silence. But freedom, he knew, was delicate. It could be lost without a single battle. The sea did not need armies to be broken. It needed only neglect, only forgetting. Poseidon sat upon a stone bench, carved with symbols of tide and moon. He let the weight of the ocean's sorrow wash over him, not resisting, only listening. Gods could roar with thunder, but sometimes they must sit quietly to hear truth. And in that moment, he heard it clearly, a pulse deep within the waters. The ocean still lived, but it was tired. Its song faltered, its rhythm broken. He lifted his eyes toward the endless blue above, shimmering faintly with distant sunlight. Even the light felt slower, dimmer, as though it struggled to pierce the water. Poseidon breathed deeply, though gods need no breath, and let the sea flow through him. He felt the longing of creatures who yearned for balance, for currents that carried joy again. He thought of dolphins whose cries once rang like laughter, now sharp and uneasy. He thought of whales whose songs once filled the ocean, now heavy with mourning. He thought of corals, bright as fire, now fading into pale shadows of memory. The ocean's sorrow was not only his to bear, it belonged to all who lived within. And yet, he knew, they looked to him, their guardian, to bring harmony back. Poseidon rose again, his trident gleaming softly, not in threat, but in promise. He walked to the balcony where the sea stretched outward, infinite and restless. Waves curled and uncurled in silence, as if waiting for a word, a sign, a breath. The god whispered to them, a voice too deep for mortals, yet gentle as tide. Do not fear. I will seek the truth of these chains, and we shall be free again. The words flowed outward, carried by currents, touching creatures near and far. A school of fish shimmered briefly, turning in unison, as though in answer. A ray glided past, wings wide, tracing the water with quiet grace. And from the distance, a whale's low note rose, soft but steady, a reply to hope. Poseidon stood tall, his resolve firm. He would not rage blindly as storms do. He would walk the ocean with patience, with eyes open, with heart listening. For he knew this mystery was not of swords or thunder, but of silence and memory. And only by understanding could he loosen the chains no trident could shatter. So began his solitude, not of despair, but of purpose. Poseidon, keeper of seas, would become seeker of truths. And in the quiet of his palace, the journey had begun. At dawn, the fishermen set out once more, their sails catching the first blush of morning light. The sea was calm, but the air hummed strangely, as if waiting for something unseen. They cast their nets with practiced ease, ropes sliding through their hands like old friends. Yet the nets did not sink as they should. They snagged, trembled, caught on nothing visible. When hauled back, the ropes carried threads of light, thin and shimmering like woven moonbeams. The men stared in silence, their faces pale, their hearts quickening with unease. No fish filled the nets, only those ghostly strands, clinging like cobwebs spun from water. The elders muttered of omens, of signs too old to name, of the sea speaking in riddles. Younger men shook their heads, yet fear lingered in their eyes, sharp as salt. Some tried to cut the threads with knives, but the blades slipped uselessly through the glow. The strands did not break. They slid back into the sea, melting into currents unseen. One fisherman dropped to his knees, whispering prayers to the waves, as if begging forgiveness. Far below, Poseidon felt it too. The ocean itself recoiled, as though refusing to be caught. The god moved through the currents, following the whispers that led to the fisherman's struggle. He saw the nets shimmering, weightless yet bound, caught in threads of light not made by mortal hands. The water around them felt thicker, reluctant, as though burdened by hidden chains. Poseidon's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with sorrow. The sea should not resist its children. For centuries, the ocean gave freely, its bounty endless, its balance unbroken. Now it withheld, not in punishment, but in pain, as if trapped within itself. The fishermen spoke in hushed voices, their words carried upward to the sky, not downward to the sea. But Poseidon heard them all the same, their confusion, their fear, their loss of trust. He lifted his hand, and the water stirred gently, loosening the nets without tearing. The threads of light drifted free, swirling in patterns that shimmered like broken stars. They sank slowly into the depths, vanishing, yet leaving behind a hush that chilled the air. The men gasped, bowing their heads, not daring to look upon what they could not name. One whispered, "The sea is bound," and the words clung to the morning like dew. Poseidon let the moment linger, then turned away, deeper into the currents that carried secrets. He followed the path of the strands, sensing them pulse faintly, like veins through the water. They wound around rocks, wrapped around reefs, subtle yet firm, binding without weight. Everywhere they touched, the sea slowed, like rivers dammed by invisible walls. Fish swam hesitantly, breaking formation, their movements scattered, their songs muted. Even the smallest shells whispered of pressure, of chains they could not see yet felt. Poseidon reached a ridge of stone where currents once raced with joyful speed. Now the water dragged itself, sluggish, bound by threads clinging like ivy to the deep. He brushed his hand against them, and they pulsed faintly, resisting his touch. They were not of metal or rope. They were of silence, of neglect, of forgetting. The god drew back, his heart heavy. These were chains no storm could shatter. For storms could break ships and mountains, but not silence, not absence, not neglect. The fishermen sailed home that day, their nets empty, their minds filled with fear. They told of glowing strands, of silence in the waves, of the sea itself recoiling. Villages whispered by firelight, children listening wide-eyed, elders frowning in thought. And Poseidon, alone in the depths, listened to the growing unease above and below. The first sign of chains had revealed itself, fragile yet unyielding, invisible yet unbreakable. The ocean was not free, and its god felt the truth settle deep within his soul. In the farthest corner of the ocean, where light barely touched, there lived the oracle of tides. She was neither mortal nor god, but a spirit older than memory, woven from water and time. Her dwelling was a cavern of shells and flowing currents, where voices of the sea gathered to speak. Poseidon knew of her wisdom, for she heard what even gods could not, the whispers of forgotten truths. He descended into the deep, where shadows thickened and silence pressed against his skin. The water grew colder, heavier, as if testing his resolve with every fathom he passed. Strange fish with glowing eyes followed at a distance, watching the god slip into the abyss. At last, he came upon the cavern, its entrance draped with kelp that shimmered like silver threads. A soft light pulsed within, steady as a heartbeat, calling him closer. Poseidon stepped inside, trident lowered, not as a ruler, but as a seeker of answers. The oracle appeared slowly, rising like mist from the water, her form shifting like waves. Her eyes glowed pale, reflecting the endless horizon, as though all seas lived within them. "Poseidon," she whispered, her voice echoing like currents through coral halls. "You have come because the ocean no longer sings, and chains weigh upon its heart." The god inclined his head, his voice deep yet careful. "I feel the silence spreading. I see the threads that bind. What are they?" The oracle's gaze drifted beyond him, to the waters that carried his question. "They are not forged of iron or stone. They are made of silence, of neglect, of forgetting. Mortals no longer honor the pact. They take, but they do not listen. They draw, but they do not give. The ocean remembers every absence, every silence, and it binds itself in sorrow." Poseidon's grip tightened on the trident, not in rage, but in understanding. "The pact," he murmured, recalling the ancient promise made when the seas first welcomed humankind. A vow that the ocean would give life, and in return, mortals would honor its song. But songs fade when ears no longer listen, and so the melody of the pact dimmed. The oracle's voice softened, as if she carried the weight of every forgotten prayer. "The chains will grow until memory returns. The sea does not seek anger, only remembrance." Poseidon bowed his head, his heart heavy with the truth. Storms could not break these bonds. Lightning could not shatter them, for they were woven not of matter, but of absence, of the spaces left empty. The oracle drifted closer, her hand of water brushing against his chest. "Guardian of the sea, you cannot break these chains alone. You must guide others to remember." Her words sank deep, heavier than stone, yet clear as sunlight on open water. Poseidon closed his eyes, letting the truth ripple through him, merging with his spirit. When he opened them again, the oracle had already begun to fade into mist. Her final whisper lingered in the cavern, soft and unyielding. The ocean's freedom lies not in storms, but in memory restored. The cavern dimmed, the pulsing light fading until only darkness remained. Poseidon turned away, carrying the oracle's words like a tide within him. He knew now the sea's chains were not meant to be broken with force. They were meant to be loosened with remembrance, with voices rising where silence had grown. As he ascended from the depths, he felt the ocean stir faintly, as though listening. And in that listening, a fragile hope was born, small as a ripple, endless as the tide. Far above the depths, sunlight touched the waves, yet the silence of the ocean still weighed heavy. Poseidon rose from the oracle's cavern, carrying her words like a current within his heart. He had seen storms, tempests, and the fury of tides, but never chains woven of memory and neglect. The sea stirred faintly around him, as if waiting for his choice, as if listening to his thoughts. He knew his path was no longer about force, but about awakening, about guiding others to remember. So he turned his gaze toward the shore, where mortals lived, close to the sea yet far from its truth. The coastline stretched wide, dotted with villages, boats rocking gently on the swells of morning. Fishermen cast their nets, their voices low, their eyes fixed on the horizon without reverence. Children played on the sand, building castles, chasing waves, laughing without knowing the sea's old promise. The ocean gave them life, yet their hearts no longer carried gratitude, only habit and need. Poseidon walked from the surf, his presence cloaked not in storm, but in calm dignity. The villagers looked upon him with awe, for though he wore no crown, the sea itself bowed. "God of the deep," one elder whispered, kneeling as though before a wave about to rise. But Poseidon lifted his hand, silencing any worship, for he sought remembrance, not blind praise. He spoke, his voice rolling like distant thunder, yet gentle as the tide upon the sand. "You live by the sea. You breathe by its gift, yet you have forgotten the pact of old." The villagers shifted uneasily, their eyes meeting, unsure of what promise he spoke of. One child, curious and bold, stepped forward and asked, "What pact, Lord of Waters?" Poseidon bent low, his eyes meeting the child's, and a faint smile stirred his beard. "The pact is a song," he said, "sung long ago when your kind first touched the shore. It promised balance. The sea would feed you, carry you, protect you, and you would honor it. Not with offerings of gold or temples of stone, but with care, with memory, with listening." The people grew quiet, their nets still in hand, their breath caught by his steady words. He lifted his trident, and the sea responded with a low, humming tone, deep and resonant. The waves swelled, not in anger, but in rhythm, as though the ocean itself remembered the song. Fishermen felt their nets tug with life, fish shimmering silver as though called by the tide. Children heard whispers in the waves, gentle melodies weaving through the foam like lullabies. The villagers felt the air shift, carrying not storm, but the memory of something greater. Poseidon lowered his trident, his gaze steady. "This is the song you have forgotten." The elder stepped forward, tears in his eyes. "We took, but we did not listen. We forgot." Poseidon placed a hand upon the elder's shoulder, heavy yet kind. "The chains upon the sea are not of my making, but of silence and neglect. Only you can unbind them." The people bowed their heads, their hearts stirred by truth they had long buried beneath routine. A young woman raised her voice, soft but firm. "We will remember. We will teach the song again." And in that moment, the waves lapped higher, brighter, as though the ocean itself exhaled in relief. Poseidon's eyes glimmered with quiet pride, for the first chain had loosened, faint as it was. But he knew the path ahead was long, and memory needed tending, like flame against the wind. He turned back toward the sea, leaving footprints that the tide gently washed away. And as he vanished into the surf, the villagers heard it still, the faint echo of a song that was theirs to carry, to sing, to keep alive, so the ocean might breathe free once more. Beyond the village, the sea stretched wide, carrying Poseidon's thoughts with the endless tide. He walked the ocean floor, his steps leaving trails of sand that swirled and vanished behind him. The oracle's words echoed still, reminding him that memory was the key, not force or thunder. The villagers had remembered, but one spark was not enough to break the ocean's chains. Mortals across the world must awaken, for the sea belonged to all, not just one shore. So Poseidon journeyed onward, seeking the hidden places where the ocean's sorrow lingered. He passed coral gardens, once bright with color, now dulled beneath the weight of silence. Fish swam slower, their patterns scattered, as though the rhythm of the sea had been lost. A turtle glided past him, ancient eyes heavy with wisdom, its shell etched with time. Poseidon laid a hand upon its shell, and the creature paused, gazing deep into him. "You have seen many tides," Poseidon murmured, "and you feel the burden of forgotten songs." The turtle blinked slowly, as though acknowledging the truth, then drifted into the shadows. Poseidon pressed on, deeper into the blue, until he came upon a sunken temple. Its columns were draped in seaweed, its stones carved with prayers long since unread. He entered the ruins, where silence rang louder than any storm, a silence thick with grief. The carvings told of offerings once made, of mortals singing to the tides in gratitude. But the words were broken, worn away by neglect, leaving only fragments of devotion. Poseidon touched the walls, feeling the sorrow that clung like salt upon the stone. "This temple has not been forgotten by the sea," he whispered, "only by the hearts of men." As he spoke, the current stirred, carrying faint echoes of voices long past. The temple seemed to breathe, its walls trembling as if yearning to be heard again. Poseidon lifted his trident, not to summon storm, but to call forth memory itself. The waters shimmered, and from the carvings rose soft shapes of light, like ghosts of songs. They danced around him, whispers of hymns sung centuries ago, prayers woven with gratitude. The god closed his eyes, letting the echoes weave into his spirit, a reminder of balance. When he opened them, the temple glowed faintly, as though life stirred again in its bones. Yet he knew it was not enough. The sea needed voices of the living, not only the dead. The chains could not be lifted by echoes alone. They needed present memory to endure. He left the temple, its light fading softly, like embers waiting for breath to rise. Above, he saw dolphins gathering, their cries sharp, their dance restless against the waves. They circled him, moving in patterns broken and uneven, their harmony undone. Poseidon raised his hand, calming the waters, and the dolphins slowed, their eyes meeting his. "You too feel it," he said softly. "The silence that binds, the song that falters." The dolphins cried again, but this time their voices rose clearer, more united than before. The sea hummed in answer, faint but present, a ripple of hope stretching outward. Poseidon's gaze turned once more to the horizon, where countless shores awaited. He knew he must walk them all, awaken them all, for the sea's chains wrapped the whole earth. It would be a journey not of storms, but of memory, not of wrath. but of guidance. And though the path was heavy, Poseidon carried within him the song of the tides. For even a single note, remembered and sung, could ripple outward to awaken the world. And in that truth, he felt the ocean stir faintly, as though the chains trembled, loosening. A reminder that hope was not lost, only hidden, waiting to be remembered. The sea stretched endless, yet Poseidon's steps carried him with purpose toward distant shores unseen. He followed the currents like threads of fate, each one pulling him toward hearts that had forgotten. The world above bustled with life, but below the waves, the silence lingered, heavy and unyielding. He surfaced near an island, its cliffs rising sharp, its forests thick with emerald green. The people there lived close to the water, yet they turned their backs to the sea. Their boats were few, their nets torn, as if the ocean had become a stranger to them. Poseidon walked ashore, the tide parting softly, his form cloaked in mortal guise. To them, he was no god, only a traveler with eyes deep as stormy skies. He entered the village square, where voices rose in worry, speaking of barren nets and failed harvests. The villagers argued, blaming storms, blaming luck. But none thought of the sea's forgotten song. Poseidon stood among them, silent, until the noise faded and all eyes turned his way. "You call to the sea for fish," he said, his voice calm yet piercing. "But do you listen back?" The people frowned, puzzled, their minds tangled in hunger, unable to grasp his words. A young boy stepped forward, holding a broken shell close to his chest. "My grandfather said the sea once sang," the child whispered, "but I've never heard its voice." Poseidon knelt, taking the shell, pressing it to his ear, and the faintest hum stirred. He handed it back, smiling gently. "The song is still there. It waits for you to remember." The villagers leaned closer, doubt flickering with a fragile spark of curiosity. He led them to the shore, where the waves lapped with rhythm, steady and patient. "Close your eyes," Poseidon said, "and listen not with ears alone, but with your heart." They obeyed, and slowly the air shifted, the waves carrying echoes hidden beneath their sound. Some heard whispers, like voices calling softly. Others felt rhythms, like drums beneath the tide. The boy gasped, clutching his shell. "I hear it. The sea is speaking." Murmurs rose among the crowd, awe breaking through years of silence and neglect. Poseidon raised his trident high, though it gleamed not with storm, but with shimmering calm. The ocean answered, rising in gentle swells, forming patterns like verses upon the sand. The people watched as symbols appeared, waves etching spirals and lines that pulsed with light. "These are the sea's words," Poseidon told them. "They are not commands, but reminders. The ocean gives, but it also listens. You must give your memory, your song, in return." The villagers bowed their heads, shame and hope mingling in their hearts. An elder stepped forward, tears streaming, his voice trembling as he began to hum. It was a broken tune, half remembered, but it carried weight, like roots reaching into soil. Others joined, hesitant at first, then stronger, their voices weaving into a single rising note. The waves shimmered brighter, the patterns glowing, as though the ocean embraced their offering. Poseidon's heart stirred, for he felt the chains shift, one link loosening in the vast unseen. The villagers opened their eyes, wonder lighting their faces as the sea sparkled before them. "The pact is not lost," Poseidon said firmly, "but you must keep it alive, every tide, every dawn." The boy clutched his shell close, his eyes shining. "We will remember, I promise." Poseidon gazed out over the water, knowing promises were seeds that needed tending. He turned back into the surf, the sea welcoming him, its voice faint but stronger than before. The villagers stood at the shore, singing still, their voices carried far by the rising wind. And deep within the ocean, Poseidon felt it. Another chain loosening, the burden growing lighter. The journey was long, but hope was no longer just his. It had begun to spread. Far from the singing village, the sea stretched quiet again, as though holding its breath in waiting. Poseidon swam through shifting currents, each one carrying whispers from places both near and far. The chain still lingered, heavy and unseen, curling around the ocean's heart like shadows of iron. Though lighter now, their weight pulled at him, reminding him the journey had only begun. He passed coral gardens where colors once blazed, now dulled, as if touched by silence itself. Fish swam in restless circles, darting as though pursued by something they could not see. Poseidon paused, listening. The water trembled faintly, not from storm, but from a hidden restraint. He followed the trembling deeper, into a trench where the sunlight faded and mystery grew. Darkness wrapped around him. Yet the sea god moved unafraid, his trident glowing softly. There, within the abyss, he found an ancient temple carved from black stone and coral. Its walls were etched with runes older than Olympus, shimmering faintly with forgotten power. The chains coiled here too, bound tight around the temple's foundation like roots of shadow. Poseidon touched the stone and visions filled his mind, waves rising, voices singing, then silence. He saw mortals long ago, kneeling at the shore, offering songs to the sea with reverence. In return, the ocean flourished, a bond of giving and receiving woven strong and true. But time had worn that memory thin, and silence had grown where song once lived. The temple became a prison of echoes, a reminder of a pact left unkept. Poseidon's chest tightened. This was no curse of rage, but of forgetting. He spoke softly to the stones. Your song was not lost. It only waits to be sung again. A ripple spread from his voice, shaking dust from carvings, making the runes flicker brighter. The chains rattled, shifting as though stirred, but they did not yet break. He knew he could not do this alone. The sea's memory needed more than his strength. Rising from the trench, Poseidon called upon the currents, sending whispers across the waters. The summons reached dolphins leaping under moonlight, whales deep in the dark, turtles riding tides. Each creature heard and answered, carrying the call further to shores where mortals dwelled. They carried not fear, but a song, simple, ancient, meant to awaken what lay sleeping. On distant islands, children stirred in their dreams, humming without knowing why. On rocky coasts, fishermen paused, hearing faint notes in the crashing surf. Even in great cities where stone walls blocked the sea, some felt a longing stir. The ocean's song was returning, thread by thread, woven through voices both human and wild. Poseidon felt it building, faint but steady, like dawn light creeping over the horizon. He returned to the temple, standing before the runes as the first echoes reached below. The stone walls pulsed, glowing faintly with the rhythm of the spreading song. The chains tightened, resisting, yet each note that reached them made them quiver more. Poseidon lifted his trident, pointing it toward the heart of the temple. Let the sea's voice rise again, he declared, not as mine, but as ours. The ocean answered, swelling with light, waves far above crashing in perfect harmony. The creatures of the deep circled the temple, adding their voices to the swelling chorus. From distant shores, mortals sang, though most did not know why, only that it felt right. The temple walls trembled, dust falling as the runes shone like stars in the dark. With a sound like thunder muffled by water, one chain cracked, then snapped apart. The sea surged, free in part, yet still bound by chains deeper and older still. Poseidon lowered his trident, breathing slow, his heart both heavy and hopeful. The journey was far from over, but now the ocean no longer sang alone. And somewhere beyond the horizon, he felt another chain stir, waiting for him to find. The ocean calmed, yet beneath its stillness, Poseidon felt the pull of another burden waiting. He drifted through twilight waters, guided not by stars, but by the faint pulse of chains. Every stroke of his trident sent ripples outward, carrying strength and silence together. He reached a vast kelp forest, swaying like green cathedrals rising toward the filtered light. Schools of silver fish wove through, scattering as shadows brushed past their shimmering walls. The shadows were not creatures, but threads of the unseen chains, stretching across the seabed. Here, the ocean did not hum or sing. It sighed, weary and subdued. Poseidon pressed his palm to the water, listening. The silence was louder than storms. He followed the sigh, deeper, where the kelp thinned and stones bore carvings worn by time. It was an altar, forgotten, draped in seaweed and shells, once a bridge between sea and shore. The chains wrapped it like vines, black and cold, draining the colors around them. Poseidon's voice trembled with memory. Mortals once sang here too. They gave, and the sea gave back. He closed his eyes and heard echoes of laughter, offerings cast into the tide, joy unbroken. But as years passed, the songs faded, replaced by silence, then by absence. The altar's light dimmed, its connection with mortals severed, leaving only emptiness behind. Poseidon touched the chains, and they hissed with cold, recoiling from his divine spark. He knew force alone could not break them. They were bound by forgetting, not by strength. The sea god lifted his trident, calling not for storms, but for voices. The summons reached across waters, not to temples or kings, but to simple hearts. On distant shores, storytellers paused, their tongues forming words they thought long lost. Children played in the surf, their laughter carrying a rhythm that echoed back through ages. An old woman by a fire hummed a tune her grandmother once sang of tides. Slowly, these scattered voices wove together, rising above silence like dawn above night. Poseidon felt the shift. The altar's stones warmed, faint light glowing through the weeds. The chains rattled, their grip weakening, though they still clung with stubborn hold. The sea creatures gathered, their forms circling in quiet reverence, awaiting release. Poseidon spoke softly. "The ocean remembers. Do you?" The words traveled upward, reaching mortal hearts, stirring them awake. A boy on a rocky shore shouted into the waves, calling them friend. A sailor at sea bowed his head, whispering thanks to waters that bore him home. Even in cities far from tides, some stirred, dreaming of waves they had never seen. The altar shone brighter, runes igniting as though fed by the scattered offerings of memory. The chains cracked, one splintering, then another, their links falling into dust. The ocean sighed again, but this time it was a breath of release, of renewal. The kelp forest glowed emerald, its leaves swaying like banners in celebration. Fish darted joyfully, freed from the shadow of silence that had weighed them down. Poseidon lowered his trident, the light fading gently, leaving peace behind. Yet in his heart, he knew more chains lingered, older and stronger, beyond horizons. The battle was not against mortals, nor against time, but against forgetting itself. He swam onward, each step heavier, yet carried by the hope he had kindled. For every chain broken, a memory returned, and the sea grew brighter with its song. And in that song, Poseidon heard something new. Mortals and sea together, not divided. The ocean was remembering, and with it, the world would learn to remember too. The sea stretched vast before Poseidon, yet he felt its song shifting. No longer silenced, but not yet whole. Each chain he broke lightened the ocean, yet the deeper ones coiled tighter, guarding the heart of memory. He swam through waters touched by twilight, the sky above painted with stars like scattered pearls. The moon cast silver across the waves, guiding him as though she too shared his burden. He surfaced near rocky cliffs where mortals once built towers to watch the tides. The towers stood crumbling, their stones scarred by storms, their voices long gone to dust. Poseidon climbed ashore, walking among ruins where ivy grew thick over forgotten walls. He touched a stone, feeling faint warmth where once offerings had been placed in reverence. The chains reached here too, draped across the earth, invisible to mortal eyes, but heavy to his. He felt them pulse, each link humming with silence, feeding on absence and neglect. Poseidon closed his eyes, listening. He heard faint echoes, songs of guardians who once kept vigil. They had sung to the sea, not with power, but with devotion, holding memory alive. Now their songs were gone, and the chains fed greedily on what was left behind. He raised his trident, summoning the waves, but not in fury, only in remembrance. The tide rose gently, carrying seashells, driftwood, and echoes of prayers once spoken. The ruins shimmered faintly, as if the stones themselves longed to remember. Poseidon's voice rang clear, deep as thunder, yet soft as waves, calling to the past. Guardians of the shore, keepers of song, your watch is not ended. Return, if only in memory. The air shifted. The wind stirred. The sea responded with a low hum. Shapes appeared, not of flesh, but of memory, woven from starlight and surf. They were the guardians, their faces kind, their voices trembling with forgotten tunes. One stepped forward, bowing low. We kept the pact, Lord of the Sea, until silence took us. Poseidon nodded, his eyes grave. Silence is not the end. Memory is never lost, only waiting.
By the power of the sea,
The guardians began to sing, voices thin at first, then rising as though finding strength anew. The chains shuddered, their links glowing with cracks of light that spread across the earth. Mortals nearby awoke from dreams, their hearts stirred by songs they did not know they knew. A fisherman at dawn paused, hearing the ocean hum in harmony with his breath. A child whispered a lullaby to the waves, never taught, yet remembered in the blood. The ruins glowed brighter, the guardian song weaving with the mortals' unconscious voices. Poseidon raised his trident high, amplifying their harmony, sending it through sea and sky. The chains screamed in silence, their links snapping one by one into nothingness. With a final burst of light, they shattered, releasing a wave of warmth and renewal. The cliffs shone silver, the ruins no longer broken, but alive with memory's touch. The guardians faded, but their song lingered, etched into the stone, into the tides, into the air. Poseidon bowed his head. Rest now. The sea remembers, and so will they. The ocean surged joyfully, waves dancing like flame beneath the moon's gaze. Yet Poseidon felt the weight of more chains, deeper and darker than these. The sea was freer, its voice louder, but its heart was still bound. He stepped back into the surf, letting the waves embrace him like an old friend. The moon shone above, casting silver paths across waters leading to horizons unseen. Poseidon followed, his trident glowing faintly, his heart filled with hope and burden alike. For each chain broken, the ocean grew brighter. But the final bond lay waiting in the abyss. And there, in the deepest silence, Poseidon knew his greatest trial awaited. The sea lay vast and quiet, its surface shimmering as if relieved of a long-forgotten weight. Poseidon stood within its heart, trident glowing, eyes fixed on the horizon where night met dawn. He felt the chains loosening, their silence breaking apart into whispers of memory and song. The ocean breathed again, no longer heavy but filled with currents that danced freely in joy. Every wave carried fragments of voices, ancient and new, flowing together in living harmony. The deep hummed with gratitude, a sound older than language, yet clear as truth itself. Mortals stirred across the shores, sensing change without knowing why, hearts lighter, dreams brighter. A fisherman smiled at the sea, feeling its song in his veins, though no words reached his ears. A child laughed as waves kissed her feet, unaware she echoed a hymn sung thousands of years ago. The world was remembering, not through scrolls or temples, but through the pulse of its living breath. Poseidon closed his eyes, listening, letting the ocean's reborn song flood his immortal spirit. It was not victory he felt, but balance restored, fragile yet radiant as dawn's first light. The chains had fallen, but he knew they were not gone forever, only dormant in shadow. Silence, like darkness, waits patiently, hoping to return when memory is neglected. Yet Poseidon also knew something greater. Songs once remembered cannot be erased, only silenced for a time. He swam deeper, through valleys of coral, where schools of fish darted like jeweled streams. The sea embraced him warmly, not as a master, but as a guardian returned home. In the abyss, he found the last remnants of broken links, fading like mist into nothingness. They dissolved under his touch, leaving behind echoes that rose into light, not chains. From the surface, the moon bowed low, casting silver across the sea like a blessing. Poseidon lifted his trident, not in command, but in quiet acknowledgement of what was saved. He whispered into the currents, "Guard well your voice. The world needs your song." The ocean answered with a roar of joy, waves cresting high, then falling into gentle calm. Stars reflected on the surface, each shimmer a note in the ocean's endless hymn. He knew the world above would forget again, as mortals always do. But the sea would not forget, and as long as it remembered, silence would never claim all. Poseidon sank into the depths, leaving the surface still, yet alive with unseen music. His figure faded into blue shadow, a part of the sea itself, eternal and unseen. The tides would carry his presence, not as fear, but as comfort, strength and balance. Sailors would feel it in the wind that guides them home. Children would hear it in seashells pressed to their ears, and dreamers would find it in whispers, reminding them that silence is never the end. For memory lives in water, and water flows forever. The chains were broken, the silence undone, and the sea sang once more, vast and free, under the eternal watch of Poseidon.